Hello and welcome to another episode of the Trino Community Broadcast. 35 it is today, and the dynamic duo is back together. Welcome back, Brian.
Hello. Thanks for having me back.
Always missing you. It's great to have you back. Lots of stuff happening while you were gone, but obviously you were busy with your son, which is also
having my spawn. So another little Commander Bun.
Exactly. But yeah, the Trino world hasn't stopped. There's lots of stuff going on. We'll talk about releases today. We'll talk about some developments on the packaging world and modernizing it. And all is going to be coming to you thanks to all the work and stuff that we get from Starburst.
Yeah, thanks a lot for tapping in and taking up the last Trino Community Broadcast and this current one, Manfred. It's been great seeing that I can leave the show and all doesn't fall apart. So I think basically at this point, I was just like, I actually was in the background of the last show, even though I didn't have much being involved with it. And I just remember feeling like, oh gosh, I wish I could it was hard to kind of let go of the reins a little bit at that point, but I was glad to see it was happening. And so again, thanks for holding these up. And I'm really excited for the show that we got today. So without further ado, before we get started, let's go do a quick ad from our sponsors.
I'm Colleen Tarto. I am the Director of Engineering on Starburst Galaxy.
What is it actually offering? So, I mean, I think this kind of like builds on some of the open source Trino stuff, but is it doing a lot more? What kind of pains is it solving? Could you kind of give us a little bit of insight going to be alleviating?
Yeah, absolutely. And so to think about that, I always like to go back and think about what's the difference between Starburst Enterprise and Trino, right? And so I always like to think of Starburst Enterprise as the cool older sibling to Trino. It's a little bit more mature, a little cooler. It's got a car. It's got some cool stuff going on, leather jacket, And Trino is awesome in its own right. Don't get me wrong, but Starburst Enterprise is just better and a bit more grown up. And specifically what that means to me is that with Enterprise, you get more functionality, faster performance, more connectors, more security, better management, better integration into the ecosystem of tools that you already use today, data governance, integration, et cetera. But what really speaks volumes to me is that when you use Starburst Enterprise, you get Starburst, right? You get best-in-class support from the folks who work for us, and they know Trino best because they created Trino, and they're continuing to contribute to Trino. But Starburst Galaxy takes that to a whole nother level, right? So one of the pain points is installing, managing, maintaining, monitoring Starburst Enterprise. And so Starburst Galaxy alleviates all of that, right? So it's a fully managed service. It's Starburst Enterprise as a managed service and more.
And one last question, is there going to be any free offerings coming up anytime soon? Is that on the road?
Absolutely. We're building out, we've got a free trial. So if you're interested, absolutely reach out to us. We are very excited about it. And then we're talking about sort of a free tier. So like being able to just play around with it in your own environment and see what's what.
We'll keep you all up to date on when you can start to play around with Galaxy and Trino for free for just a little bit and get to know this incredible service called Starburst Galaxy. Thank you so much, Colleen.
Thank you.
All right. And I wanted to say hello, Mohammed. Thanks for joining the show. And if you all have any questions, this is something we don't usually end up calling out. We should probably do this more. But if you are watching us on YouTube, you can, and or LinkedIn, actually. LinkedIn, you can also chat. Unfortunately, the service doesn't allow us to chat back on LinkedIn, but we'll figure that one out. But if you want to ask us a question on LinkedIn or on YouTube, feel free to just throw in the comments section, and we'll let it pop up like this, and we'll answer your question as quickly as we can.
We'll also try to have a look at the Slack channel.
Yes, as well as the Slack channel. So we do have Manfred does this a lot better than I do because I'm usually watching the other channels. But if you also want to ask questions on our Trino Community Broadcast channel, that is another good space to even put in suggestions about the show. If you like, there's something you want us to do or a particular topic concept you'd like us to cover, please do let us know about that and what you'd like us to cover. But something that we're always asked to cover is what's new with Trino. So
there's always something happening.
Yeah, exactly. So we've had actually a lot happen in these last couple of weeks since, well, I guess the last month since the last episode. So Manfred, what did I miss? I mean, I've been gone this last month as well, taking care of a baby.
You missed a whole bunch of things. It's funny that we just watched a demo a little bit of Starburst Galaxy because we have an upcoming event called Cinco de Trino in May where Dane is going to show some of the new features in Starburst Galaxy. And we'll also talk about Starburst Galaxy later on today because, as you'll see, Starburst Galaxy is already running with Java 17. So we'll talk about that a bit later today. But yes, releases, always something happening. We got in a pretty good groove now, and we got our releases pretty much happening every Wednesday. That's kind of the plan. Sometimes we have to delay it by a day or two, or release block or something is happening, which actually happened last night. So we will cut a release later today, most likely. But nevertheless, there is the 4 releases, 375, 376, 377, and 378 coming later today, all available for you. And a whole bunch of things slipped in again.
So by the time this thing publishes, if you're watching the show, this will be filled in with whatever it makes it into the release, whatever sneaks in. Now that there was a bug that always introduces new possibilities as well. Like, hey, I can get my PR in now.
Yeah, it does. It does happen though. Like literally, we were gonna release last night, and then I'm like, what's David doing? There's like another merge. So more things are coming. I'm sure the team in Poland and in India and in Japan and everyone, they merged more stuff again. So that's
every setback is an opportunity,
Exactly. So no, there's lots of cool stuff happening. So one of the things that we've started doing is a lot of the performance improvements we have in Starburst Enterprise are slipping down to Trino because we think everyone should have those benefits. When you look at improved predicate pushdown for PostgreSQL, for example, that came from Starburst, and a lot of the other developments are also from us, obviously.
Nice.
And the community is also working very hard on all sorts of stuff. So in 375, we had that predicate pushdown. We also had table comments in the MySQL connector, and then general improvements for aggregation filters. There's lots more, obviously, as usual. You'll see the titles here for the releases are actually links to the release notes, much more. 376 was a bit longer because we got a bit of a blocker, so that delayed us a bit. So we slipped in more.
Yeah, of course.
One of them is the Parquet data reading that got quite a bit happening. And then again, on the JDBC connectors, you see here the join pushdown for MySQL. That actually got expanded to be automatic join pushdown. And I'll talk about that in a sec, what that means. Aggregation pushdown for Oracle came. And then ClickHouse got table and column comments. Accumulo got stuff like adding and deleting schemas. A very important one is the CLI and JDBC driver got support for the system trust store. So the trust store that's built into the operating system and the certificates managed there can now be used, which makes it a lot easier because when you provision the operating system in an organization, you basically have some sort of operating system image, and often that includes your internal certificates and all that kind of stuff. Why that is easier now is when you do that in an organization, the users that want to use the CLI or the JDBC driver, which means a lot of the Java applications that are using the JDBC driver, you don't have to configure a custom Java key store file and muck around with all those flags. You just use the system trust store and it works, right? So that's kind of nice.
That's awesome.
Those come in. Two-way TLS SSL certificate validation with LDAP authentication also came in. Basically means that it's not just TLS and the certificate of the LDAP server will validate, but also the one of Trino to the LDAP server. So it's like both ways, basically. Just for like even
kill those man-in-the-middle attacks from either direction.
Exactly, basically. So that was from 376. What Martin thought was worth mentioning. 377, we got the new trim syntax from SQL, which allows you to basically trim a string, like the spaces in front or in the back and mixed and whatever. So that's kind of cute. So that when you like are used to like the standard SQL syntax, you can use all that stuff. We got some Metastore performance improvements with Glue in this case, and then another join push down for SQL Server. That's also what.
Are those all those push down, basically like aggregation push down, Oracle join push down? All those are kind of in the same vein of like the stuff coming out of Starburst, or are those like
exactly?
Okay,
exactly. And what I wanted to mention about that is actually, and that's something that's not obvious. I mean, it says it in the release notes, in those official release notes. It doesn't say it, but in the detailed release notes it said as it actually includes table statistics support.
Oh,
so
cool.
Remember, when the join, when a query is written and then processed into the plan to execute and process the query, if you have table statistics, which means where, like, what's the distribution of null values and stuff like that, like how big is the table, if you have those, you can do the planning better, right? And so far, table statistics didn't exist in PostgreSQL, MySQL, and SQL Server. That is now there. And so that means that generally any query that can benefit from those table statistics will be faster. Specifically also, and that's what we saw in the release notes there, the join pushdown will be faster because it is now enabled by default. Before, it wasn't enabled by default because it could make it worse if you push down a join, right? Because you don't know where what side is what, right? But now, with the table statistics being available, the cost-based optimizer can make a smart decision. Do I push down or not? So now that's automatically join push down is happening. So that's really cool.
That's showing for MySQL and SQL Server. Is this like everything else is kind of to come, I guess, on these? We have to kind of slowly iterate across the different connectors that use JDBC?
PostgreSQL got it as well. It's not always necessarily possible, depending, like most of those, it will probably come. At the moment, we have it in PostgreSQL, MySQL, and SQL Server. I'm not sure what the plan is in terms of which others it applies to and can be done. I don't even know which ones we already have. I think we have it for Oracle, but I'm not sure now. Anyway, but there's these coming, and like, with predicate pushdown, for example, for PostgreSQL, that already existed in Oracle and stuff like that. So it's just basically all of the performance will be lifted up more and more and more, which is really awesome.
And last little bug I have, I'm curious I've seen like so many constant updates for Parquet data. I know that's been a huge focus for us to kind of get Parquet on the same level of Orc. Have you heard anything about like where we're at with that? And like, is Parquet pretty much like, does it still, like, I've typically recommended to people that, if they're choosing between the two and they don't have any other reason to make a decision about like why they would use one versus the other, if they're using Trino as their primary kind of like analytics system, just go with Orc. But is that still the case now? It's like,
so I don't know. I'd have to lie if I say I know the plans
fair
there.
enough.
But I do know that Orc is still faster in Trino. But I'm pretty sure, like in Starburst Enterprise, we have a native additional optimizations for Parquet reading that brings it on par. I don't know what the plan is there. I think there might be a plan to get that into Trino over time, but I don't know where that stands.
Okay.
So,
because
no promises, but
I'll bug Dane about it, because I remember at one point I was talking to him and he was like, we should, typical, canonical advice, at least at, a year ago roughly in Trino, was like, stick with Orc. If that's, if you don't have a particular reason to be in Parquet, go with Orc. And so I feel like that might be less of a thing. So maybe we'll make that the question of the week or question of the episode next episode.
I think some of those like 376 improvements for Parquet data are already in that vein. And there's probably more coming, also considering that now we have like, Hive, Delta Lake, Iceberg, all the big like connectors for object storage systems, lake houses basically relying on that to some degree, right? Like Parquet is just a very common format. Like obviously Orc is as well, but those are the two, right? So you need to be fast on both. So that's cool.
Gotcha. Cool.
Also cool news on Iceberg for all the Iceberg fans, including you, Brian. The V2 table format support is getting better and better. So like read is closer now to be completely done, and we're working towards write. And so as the table format spec evolves and goes there, our implementation is also following along as much as possible. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm excited to see those ride operations. I know we've been working a lot with AWS on those, and in particular, that's going to be super powerful, right? Because like once we can, right now, it's like you have to have like you're absolutely required to have both Spark and Trino at this point to kind of do one or the other, even if you want to play with it. I guess if you're kind of doing sandboxing, you might do Spark and then like to enter it in the data and then like read it out with Trino. But like, and you can even do Spark a little bit by itself, but if you're trying to kind of even scale it up even a little bit, the typical pattern is like use Spark for writes, use Trino for reads. And it's like, hopefully getting to a point where like, obviously Spark catches up a little more in their reads. And then we kind of catch up a little more in the writing capability so that you can kind of pick and choose and be free from, having to choose both always.
Yeah, to be honest, the plan is to take over the world and to have Trino dominate and do everything Spark does faster and better. So that's the real plan.
Yeah. Well, and I think about it from, their perspective, right? You gotta take your time with these things. It's not like, oh, okay, now Trino supports this and tomorrow I'm just going to like migrate all my Spark stuff over.
Yeah, no.
It's never, that's not how it works. So it's like having that freedom and capability to have Trino take over a lot more of those use cases where it makes sense. Then that's something we want to actually get Trino to. And I hope a lot of people get excited about that because, with tardigrade and all that stuff coming in, it's going to make it a lot more sensible to use this in like more of a ETL or whatever, if you're talking data lakes, ELT sense. So. Yeah,
no, don't get me wrong. I love the competition, and like nothing is better than competition between open source projects in a friendly collaborative way, which is exactly what we do with the Spark and Delta Lake and Iceberg and all these other communities, right? That's what it's all about. Together, we sort of like raise the bar for everyone, which is awesome.
Totally.
Now, the one thing I wanted to mention, there was a failure with distinct limit kind of queries. That was one of the release blockers that we had, and it was just like edge case. It wasn't like that distinct limit was broken completely. It was just like for a small edge case with dictionary encoded data. But that was one of the release blockers that delayed us with, I think, caused us to have a little bit more time for 376 while the list is a bit longer.
Nice.
A very cool feature that we'll talk about later and I'll show you is someone added a whole new page, or like actually a couple of pages to the web UI that shows you the information of all the workers, and we'll have a demo of that later. So that's cool.
Awesome.
Always good to see the web UI expand and become more powerful and friendly as well. It is obviously a very technical UI, but it is still very useful to have.
And that's why people get the book, and you can get the book for free, or just buy it off Amazon, one of the two. So
yeah, I guess I have to update that because that is not in there at some stage. But
just add it to the list, and then we'll get the new version out, in a couple weeks, right? No big deal.
Easy peasy, right? Cool. Yeah, actually, it's funny because in the demo later on, I'll show you like how to start from a Tarball and the configuration files from back when the book was released, which is not that long ago, really. But there were a couple of small changes. They're not completely compatible with the latest releases, but
books are stale, man. But it's it is what it is. That's why you kind of have to go halfway between the books and halfway between the docs.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all good. On the JDBC driver, I wanted to mention the user property is no longer required, which is useful. And then one thing that is kind of a breaking thing is the internal communication shared secret value is now required. That is not something that it is best practice to set that, and it's just a long random string to basically be used between the coordinator and all the workers. It's a shared secret value, right? Like long hash or whatever, something. You could get away without setting that. This is now required. The reason that is the case so that there's more security between all the different nodes in the cluster, no confusion. And also specifically when you enable the automatic internal TLS between the cluster nodes, that shared secret is used to create the actual certificates and stuff for that. So we're just making that up.
So that's required only if you've enabled the internal communication, or it's required all the time?
It's enabled with any authentication usage, which basically means anything.
Like logging in.
Yeah, like as soon as you have authentication enabled, which is not enabled by default, but as soon as you enable any authentication type, be that like password with LDAP or a password file or whatever, Kerberos, for God forbid, if you want to go into that vein or whatever else, right?
Yeah.
Then you need to do that. Also, remember, when you do need to enable authentication, you also need to enable HTTPS/TLS.
Yep.
So, like you're going to have to do a bunch of things anyway. This is just a long random string that you flop into the config properties file. So it's not a big deal, but it's worth knowing about.
Gotcha.
So if you upgrade, make sure you have that value set to something. And the docs has an example command where you just like, you base encode something and create a long random string with OpenSSL or something. And that's it.
I'm just going to type ABCD and just hope for the best.
Yeah, that's not very secure. It's about as secure as using password as the password.
Maybe, yeah, I was gonna say password's a little more secure, or maybe it's because it's easier to guess. I don't know, but cool. Anything else before we hop on to the concept?
Well, 378 later is coming later today. We capture what's there next time, but there's not much.
Perfect. All right. Well, to the concept of the week.
All right. We'll talk about packaging Trino today.
Yeah.
What does this even mean, Brian?
I mean, so if I want to run Trino, sometimes maybe I want to just play around with it locally. Sometimes maybe I want to actually install a whole bunch of nodes. I mean, just one of the big words that are sitting inside of Trino is distributed. So sometimes it's kind of how do we actually take all this code and make it to where all of these different scenarios, we can actually deploy this code in some way that will enable us to actually set up either a giant cluster or a single node, or maybe even a very kind of tiny cluster. And so packaging is kind of this way for us to meet these different needs. And sometimes the needs are complex in that, you have maybe more cloud environment, and there's only, very specific ways that you want to handle things like scaling and things like that. So, that's going to require a certain type of packaging. How are we going to actually pull the information in without having to do a whole bunch of custom stuff? And then sometimes it's just hey, I want to go and play around with this on my own local computer. Is there a way for me to simply do that? Is there a way for me to actually set up a proof of concept in my company's local network? So packaging kind of is the ways that we think about how are we going to take all that code and all those binaries and make it something that's, fairly straightforward approach to installing Trino so that people can use it in all these different contexts. That's how I think of it anyways. And so we have three ways to do this, right? And so
I think in a nutshell, I always think that's how we give you the goodies.
Yeah, that's how there you go. Yeah, summarized this very eloquently.
Yeah, and what we really mean by giving you the goodies is everything that's needed for the Trino application. And by default, with every release, we make 3 different package versions available. The most simple one is the Tarball, which is basically just a tar file, which is a tape archive. Well, we're not doing the tape thing, but
we're not.
No, not really.
Ship out the tapes for this release.
I did use tape way back when in the Commodore 64 for some things, but we're not doing that anymore these days.
Okay. All right.
So the Tarball is just an archive file that is zipped up and has the stuff in it. And when I say the stuff, it's basically a couple of directories. Mostly the bin directory, which has the launcher script in it, the lib directory, which has all the globally needed libraries, including also the web app itself, for example, and then the plugins. The plugins are separate directories, which have also, again, a whole bunch of Java libraries in it. Each one is its own. So there's an Oracle directory in there for the Oracle connector. There's a PostgreSQL for the Postgres connector, and so on. But there's also one for, say, the password file authentication. Everything that's implemented as a plugin is in there and is loaded separately.
And when you say globally needed libraries, we're talking the core, the optimizer, all that kind of stuff.
All that kind of stuff, right? Yeah, exactly. The whole discovery service so that the server can start up. Trino runs on top of Eclipse Jetty as an application server, so that part is there. All sorts of stuff. Literally, there's hundreds of files. Cool. We can look at that later, how much there is. But the main thing I want to mention about that is basically, in order to run Trino, you just need Java virtual machine, Python if you use the launcher script, and you should, and Linux, because
which Java virtual machine do they need though?
You need Java 11.
Yeah.
Used to have Java 8 as a requirement, then Java 11 became the requirement. Java, we always rely on what is called the LTS, or long-term support version from Java. Yeah. And we'll talk about that later. The latest one is actually 17 now. So there's some rambling going on, but let's stick with the packaging for now. So we have the launcher script that's useful to start the application. I'll show that later. What's important to know about the Tarball is it is sort of the minimum. It has no config scripts in it. So if you just extract that, there's nothing you can do with it. You have to add a bunch of configuration files into the etc directory inside that directory where you extracted. So you have to add your config.properties file, your JVM config, which is the configuration for the global stuff, the JVM config file, which is just the memory configuration, that kind of stuff for starting up the Java virtual machine in the first place. Log properties is kind of optional, just for logging configuration. And notebook properties is a file that just allows you to sort of give it a unique name for that node in the cluster, right?
Yeah.
And set the environment. And then the main one is obviously the etc catalogs, properties files, to define all the configuration for connecting to the various data sources.
Yeah, and those ones are interesting, right? Like it's if depending on what you have in there is what's actually going to get used from that plugins, like the artifacts will actually be used. Is like
exactly, yeah.
One thing is like, you have literally every single plugin that is developed when you unpack this Tarball, but maybe you've only configured like MySQL and something like, so the question is like, are those plugins loaded? And the answer is yes, they are, even if you're not directly using them.
Well, only sort of. Like how Trino actually works is it has this is a Java lower level kind of thing. Java has separate class loaders. Yeah. So like a concept where it loads the stuff for it. And Trino is a very complex and well-written application where the class loaders for the different plugins are not shared.
Yeah.
So you can, and what that enables is you can, for example, have a connector that connects to some old legacy system that needs a JDBC driver that has some other dependencies to something very old as a library, and you can have that plugin use that old stuff, but at the same time you can have another connector that uses a newer version of some of those dependencies because it's more modern, without getting in each other's way. So there's separate class loaders.
So I've seen though at times, like when you're still like starting up the server, I still see those plugins come up. So I'm like, even if I'm not actually like configuring them in the catalog properties, is that not actually loading them into runtime, or is it just like kind of?
It's just registering it all, but it's not actually loading everything.
Oh, see, all this time you learn something new live on in front of a whole bunch of people. So it's actually like just basically saying that we see this plugin's there, but we're not actually loading or actually bringing that into runtime. So all this time I thought it was like in runtime somehow.
Yeah, no, it's separate, and it's even separate for each. It's kind of interesting. From all I understand is, every catalog gets a separate instance of, like in the old documentation, we used to write that a catalog is an instance of a connector. So it's kind of like every catalog means that a connector is loaded separately again on a class loader. I'm not 100% sure if that's correct, or if there's some sharing between catalogs that use the same connector or not. But everyone, they only get loaded when necessary.
Yeah. Well, one thing that we did at my last company, just to specifically avoid anything getting loaded at all, was we took out all the plugins that we just knew we were never going to use, and that obviously cleared up disk space, but we also it avoided like having to add any of the extra weight that Trino had to do to even maintain any of that stuff. So
yeah, exactly. And that's something I'll talk about later in the customization as well. That's definitely one of the things you can do.
Nice.
So yeah, Tarball doesn't have anything. You have to throw the additional configuration in, and then it's good. You can use it wherever, right? Like any Linux distribution, theoretically, well, not any, but like, reasonably new will work, right? So we have the detailed requirements in the documentation, but essentially That's the first option, and that's sort of like will work randomly wherever, sort of thing. So you can throw that on your whatever cloud provider, your Ubuntu, Linux, or Debian, or Alpine, or whatever. It'll work just fine.
Yeah. It's the catch-all one that if you don't want to have any other required dependencies, like this will run on just like anything.
Yeah, in fact, it also will, for example, run on Windows subsystem for Linux if you run on Windows, or it will run on macOS directly. In fact, like 99% use cases, the Linux requirement is just for some of the underlying Hadoop sort of things. For production usage, you couldn't do that, obviously, but for you playing around locally, and we'll see that later on, you can run it on your macOS machine or so as well.
Yeah.
Now the next, so that's the Tarball. We're never going to get rid of it. This is like the bare bones, really useful one. The next one is the contentious RPM, because the reason why, and I have to like give you that context, that the reason why I chose packaging as a topic was because we wanted to throw away the RPM.
Why do we hate the RPM so much?
Well, we hate the RPM, not really, but we struggle with the RPM because it makes like the Tarball is already big. The RPM is even bigger.
Yeah.
It adds time to the build process quite a bit. And it's also hard to say where it's going to work, right? Like RPM stands for Red Hat Package Manager. Yeah. But because it's an RPM, it declares the dependencies to the Java version, to the Python version, based on the specific RPM-based Linux distribution it's aimed at. Yeah. Which means it kind of only works for a specific version of CentOS or whatever it's aimed at, which then means, well, someone says, well, I'm using SUSE or I'm using Fedora or blah, blah, whatever, and then it doesn't work. And we don't have the time and infrastructure to test all the different variants of the RPM. So we were contemplating getting rid of it. There's a lot of users out there. So for now, at least, we'll definitely keep it. Why is it useful? Well, it is useful because what it does, it adds those operating system specific wrinkles, right? Like it makes it so that the whole of Trino is not just in one directory, right? Like wherever you extracted the Tarball, that's where it sits, and that's fine. You can put it in /opt or whatever. The RPM sprinkles it across the operating system in the required default path. So your configuration is in root, etc Trino. Your like the files for the core are in varlib Trino, and then varlib Trino plugins and so on, right? So it's across the operating system, which makes it easier to manage for any tooling that's specific to the operating system. It also makes cleanup easy, right? Like you can just RPM uninstall again and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. It also adds the launcher script as a system service. So when the machine boots up, it will automatically also start up Trino. Yeah. So it's more convenient in that aspect, but it doesn't have any additional stuff beyond that, right? So the launcher script that's included can be registered. So if you use the Tarball, you can also just set it up, make a symlink from your Etsy initd system or whatever you're using for startup to the launcher script, and will start, right? Like I'll use it later on when I do the demo. I can go bin launcher run or bin launcher status, bin launcher stop, that kind of stuff. And that's basically built into the RPM.
Yeah, so it sounds like for CentOS systems specifically, or any kind of Red Hat distribution that goes off of that, that may be somewhat compatible and kind of uses RPM structure, you're able to basically just like go around a lot of that setup when you use the RPM, especially when it comes to managing upgrades and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly, right? Like that's the advantage. Do you still need to do configuration? Yes, because obviously the JVM config is going to be a standard. Hopefully you have a bigger machine, which means you have to pump up the memory setting for the JVM config. You're hopefully going to connect some catalog. Well, it doesn't include any catalogs by default that are for your system, so you need to add those, right? So it's not like you don't have to do configuration. You just have to do a bit less. Yeah. And the other problem is, as I said, the RPM declares the dependencies it needs. And those are like the Python and Java versions. Depending on the CentOS version and the packaging like repositories you hooked up, those dependencies might not be there. Then you have to install the RPM ignoring that dependency information, like there's like a flag no deps. And then it works again, but you have to know about that. So it's, like it's great, but also not so great. So, but lots of people use it. So So that's the RPM packaging. Last one is the container image. For everyone out there that uses Docker will know about that. I'm calling it a container image because while it is a Docker container image, it can totally be used on things like Kubernetes that don't actually use and rely on neat Docker images. They need just container images. Yeah. So what is a container image? Well, it's a bit more even. Remember, a container image also includes the base Linux distro. And in our case, it also includes the Java and the Python, exactly what it's needed. So when you start up the container, it will completely start up. Like the Java is in the container, the Python is there, all the Trino stuff is there, and the default set of a couple of catalogs, the JVM config, all of that stuff is there suitable for the container. And that's also very nice. It allows you to run it and then use it in the Helm charts in Kubernetes in the cloud. But again, you still also need to do configuration, and our Helm chart allows you to add that kind of stuff as well, right? So
yeah.
So those are the three options, basically.
If you want to look into any of that too, there's a Trino Getting Started repo that actually just like solely relies on the this Docker image, or in particular the container image, and like that's how a lot of people are using it to just sandbox and play around with Trino. So
yeah, because it's easiest, right? Like all you need, you have your Docker installed on your machine, and you fire it up. You don't have to worry about any of the dependencies. It all comes in it. That's it, right?
Is this one command, Docker compose up -d or whatever container.
Yeah, or even like I can show that later. It's just like you don't even have to do Docker compose. You can just Docker run blah.
Yeah, that's as well. That's it. Yep,
right.
Exactly.
So super nice. And so that's the images we offer, and we'll continue to offer all of those going forward. Now, of course, when it comes to customizations, you have to get them somehow in. And so there's many things you can do. So like you mentioned before, you can remove all the unused plugins, for example. That would make the footprint on the installation on your systems smaller and potentially start up faster, right? So it might be a good idea. You can also use the Tarball to create your own package, right? Like if you are like a shop that uses only Ubuntu, well, then you can make a Debian package, for example, out of it. And you can even go one step further and say, well, you're not only going to make a Debian package, you're going to make a Debian package for your production cluster. You could, right?
Yep.
Which could actually include all the files for your catalogs and all that kind of stuff, and manage the upgrade process by just the native packaging system. Totally feasible. It will completely depend on what your organization wants to do. Maybe you don't want to do that, but you want to use Ansible or Chef or whatever. There's like hundreds of these different provisioning systems. The Tarball is an easy thing to always manipulate because, well, it's just an archive file, and you can ship that around as binary and so on, right? So that's useful customizations. And then you can also do that with the RPM. So I've created a little proof of concept repository as part of this idea that we get rid of the RPM. All I did is I created another project that basically pulls the bits that make the RPM out and then declare a fixed dependency version. So this project basically can build the RPM. If you browse into the directory structure for the server, you can see in the source there, this is exactly the stuff from the Trino RPM. And it's just shows also how to install it and that kind of stuff. But you could use the same structure to build your own RPM and test it for your specific, I don't know, SUSE, Linux, RPM distro or whatever, right? So you can tweak it, and like this also contains the configuration files for like the post-install, pre-install for the RPM base and all that kind of stuff. So if we ever decide that we don't want to maintain the RPM anymore within the Trino core repository, so every build gets slowed down by that, or like we have these kind of like sequential things, we could move to that. And we could even do multiple as a Trino project. We could do the SUSE RPM and the CentOS RPM and the Fedora RPM and tweak them a bit and all that kind of stuff, right?
I'm kind of curious, Manfred, you've had a lot more open source experience than I have. And I'm like, have you ever, you see a lot of times where like, open source communities have community managed like kind of elements, and then they'll have like the core managed type of packages and stuff like that, or parts of the project. I usually you'll see things a lot of times like start out as a community thing, and then it gets kind of like graduates up to the core. Does it ever go the other way? Like, could in this particular case with RPM?
It does. Like, in fact, funny example I stumbled across recently. You know how we had Presto admin in the past?
Yeah.
There is a Trino admin. So someone in for those of you that haven't been around that long, Presto admin was a bunch of terrible Python scripts. Sorry to say that. That allowed you to manage a cluster of then Presto with basically a bunch of Python commands, and it would actually connect to the other machines. It would kind of do what you actually like have use Ansible for these days, right? So like it was kind of like a poor man's hack around. And when we moved from Presto to Trino, we decided that it's not worth maintaining this anymore, and we basically said, well, forget it. This is it was just too painful to deal with, and we kind of deprecated it. But someone took up the reign and is sort of running a Trino admin system now. I haven't tested that, but it exists. So it does happen the other way around as well.
Yeah, and I think I've also seen that kind of like with the Ranger thing, right? Because like there was a whole like it's kind of like that, right? But there is a community like kind of managed, and I think there's actually a second version of that coming out soon from what I've heard in the community. So there's like two people that have actually come out with like a Ranger community run plugin, whereas before we weren't actually that's actually not a good example because we weren't ever managing that, but the Ranger group was managing the one for Presto, and then once we changed the name, that dependency went away, and then so now the community has now picked that up for the Ranger. I guess you could say since the Ranger team was managing it before, now the community is managing that. I'm curious if if we do this with the Trino RPM, like maybe we would see something like that where enough people that
it might well be that I know that there's a couple of large organizations that use Trino that use the RPM, so maybe it's something where they would be willing to collaborate and stuff like that. And it's not like this is the beauty of the open source community and an open source project. You can do both, right? Like you can still use my proof of concept and create your own. You can open source it and use it for own, and like this is all about collaboration, right? So
totally.
Any of those things work. And then last customization I wanted to also mention that's kind of important is you can also create your own Docker image.
Yeah.
And that's useful because that will make the speed up of your cluster and stuff smaller. Like if you make the Docker image smaller. One important tip when you do that, and you write your Docker file, you could do from so-and-so and like use from TrinoDB Trino and basically inherit the Trino image.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Yep.
because what that means is like the way Docker works is a Docker or / a container image just adds layers. Even if those layers remove files, the overall thing will stay big unless you like completely rewrite the sort of like hackery on the layers. So if you truly want to go and make an optimized separate Docker container, use the RPM, put it all together, and then that allows you to go and use like a super minimal distribution, for example. So you could make it based on like whatever your organization standard is for the operating system. You could use Alpine or Ubuntu, like a light core one or so. So you can use all those.
Yeah, and I think we currently use like Alpine or some other smaller version. I think at one point it was Alpine, and now I've seen something different if I remember correctly.
I think we use one of those super small Red Hat UBIs or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. I remember we switched it at some point, but before we were using Alpine, and then like I guess like the other thing I would say with that is like, if you are not sure where to even begin, just look at if you go into like the Trino repo. So let me just go into GitHub real fast.
You can like same idea as the CentOS one. You can just look at what Trino does and sort of like copy that and do something similar.
Exactly. So just go Trino core Docker, and then there's the Docker file that's used here. You can literally just like copy off of this one, and the main thing is that anything that you do that's custom, just add it to this same run command. And while you're troubleshooting, you can make separate run commands, but you want to try to make sure that if you're doing it for this Docker image, make sure you add it to the same run command, because otherwise each individual run command that you do will add another layer. It makes another layer, and sometimes that ends up duplicating the written data that you do in each step. So this is why you see only one run command here. Anything extra you add, just make sure that's like a kind of a typical housekeeping, running your own Docker image thing. But and that's what you said, the Red Hat UBI. You were spot on.
So I guessed right.
Yep.
Yeah. So also tip, by the way, if you don't want to have that script in the Docker file itself, you can also just write it externally and then run it from like outside of the repository. But yeah, so that's the kind of stuff that is all related to packaging. So rest assured, the packages will be around and available for you all one way or another. If the RPM goes to some other place, then it's still going to be around. So no worries there. Last one mention that I just wanted to throw out there. You can use Brew to install it as well.
I love Brew. I love Homebrew. It's the best.
It's not always up to date, and you can run it so that it starts up as a service or not. But just to play around, if you're on macOS already, that's also an option, right? So
and who got us registered with Homebrew? I thought I remember somebody.
I don't know, but I think it's Martino David that maintains that. Actually, it's kind of.
I thought it was you. That's why I was trying to be so facetious. I was like, "Who did this?" And I thought
no. I think it was like, it's kind of under the radar. Not many people know it exists. It's not documented or anything, but I thought it's kind of cool.
Yeah, it is. It's very simple. For some reason I thought you were the one that set this up. I know you set up one for one of the clients.
I discovered it at some stage. I was like, what?
Nice. Cool. So it looks like we're making it a very common theme to not just do one, but two concepts of the episode. So what are we doing now? We kind of, or unless, did I cut you off from the packaging? It sounds like that was it.
No. I think that's it. Packaging is good. You can do a jingle if you want. Awesome. Yeah, the other topic of the month of the episode is modernizing Java, or modernizing Trino to Java 17. I think this is important to talk about because it's coming. Yeah. As I mentioned earlier, Starburst Galaxy has been using Java 17 already for quite a while. There were some last holdouts, maybe 2 or 3 months ago or so, that needed it to be upgraded. But basically at this stage, you can use Java 17, and we are using it in production with Starburst Galaxy. It's basically working. Not all the connectors will work. Like nearly all of them. There's some JDBC driver updates necessary and stuff like that. But the main thing why I want to talk about this is because we want to move to Java 17 very soon. So everyone in the community should know about it and sort of like let us know if that is an issue for them, right? Like, it shouldn't be, because you have to have a dedicated server anyway, and then it shouldn't matter what Java you install in there. License or anything like that doesn't change. The reason we want to do it is because the latest LTS and the supported LTS is Java 17, has been since September last year, or I think last year. But like quite a while anyway. And it has a lot of improvements again. Like, Java has been moving very fast, and specifically, and you were nerding out about that before the call a bit, before the broadcast today, there's a lot of language improvements as well. Like, not just performance improvements on the runtime, but language improvements. So we would like the maintainers and contributors, we would all like to actually move to require Java 17 on the code level, because it would allow us to use some pretty cool new APIs, and like even simple things like multi-line strings. Like, you can just go, this is the string, and it goes over multiple lines of source code. It makes a lot of things cleaner and faster, and that would be really good.
Yeah, in general, we're we'll get into more of this at some point. I think maybe the next episode, if depending on like we're talking, who's going to be showing up for the next episode, if we're going to have a guest or not, but. We have, I do want to get like into a nitty gritty episode where we actually talk about some of the specific pieces of language that were added to Java 7 or since Java 11 to Java 17. what's been added. And one of the particular things that it's exciting is like the vector API. We've had a lot of people in the community asking about vectorization, and we already do that somewhat. Like there's this auto vectorization capability, which vectorization means like I'm going to be able to take, something like a for loop that runs many times. And essentially the loop is something that can get run in parallel, right? So if I can apply some auto vectorization, that means that I can see this loop, I can see it can get run in parallel. So I'm going to automatically run it across processors, threads, and do it, Java basically will take it over at that point. And then with Java 17, we'll actually be able to have a lot more custom capabilities to use an API that will kind of change depending on the underlying hardware, but like we'll actually be able to understand, hey, I'm running on some, parallel processing like GPU thing, or I'm able to do all this other stuff. And now I can actually, if we call this vector API and request to run a certain bit of code in parallel, now we can take advantage of more things like this. So this is stuff that we've been, people have been asking about in terms of like, how do we keep, Trino on the bleeding edge of the fastest query engine. And so this is how. So this is why this stuff gets really exciting, and we'll dive into a little bit of that stuff, Java stuff here in the next couple episodes.
Yeah. Like a good example is also like when we moved from Java 8 to Java 11, it was very crucial to move soon, because 8, basically the startup time of the Java virtual machine and stuff wasn't very good.
Yeah.
Other people would call it terrible, but it wasn't very good. And it like that obviously inhibited like the whole container usage, right? Like It's very crucial for containers. Java 11 improved a lot on that. Now we are using, and Trino is suitable to run on ARM-based processors and x86 processors. So a lot of those kind of improvements, and also even towards the GPU kind of stuff in newer versions of Java, to get better and better, right? So it's kind of a free upgrade in terms of performance, but just using a newer version of the JVM.
Yep.
And we want to make sure we can take advantage of that for our users. So
totally.
So please call out in general. If you're using Trino, please let us know if there is any issues with moving to Java 17. For example, on the container world, wouldn't matter, because as we talked about packaging, it doesn't even matter. You don't really the Java version is already in the container, so that would be completely transparent for you. But RPM, obviously, you would have to figure out how you change over to have Java 17 provision on your system. Tarball, you have to do it even more manually, right? So this is the kind of stuff we need. And sometimes also, and this is kind of sad, but organizations also move, like some organizations move slower than others, and they have a requirement. Well, I can't use the latest and greatest, whatever. Given that Java 17 is an LTS from Oracle and like all the other vendors of Java, it's the long-term, like it's the currently supported LTS version, like long-term support. That shouldn't be an issue, but who knows? Like, might still be. Like,
yeah, government is one of those like canonical examples of just moving at incredible snail speed to upgrade anything. They just like once something works and they have a solution to something, they never want to change it.
Yeah, anything like I remember I worked at a telco here in Canada quite a few years ago now, but I remember back then it was like the latest was like Java, I don't know, like 8 or whatever.
Yeah.
And they were using Java 4 and stuff like that. And I was like, I don't even remember how to write this Java code anymore. It's like so old and so terrible. I don't want to touch it. But that's what was the required version, and like it was crazy, right? So
every line you're writing, it's like, we don't know this.
Like my eyes are glazing over. I'm like, oh no, terrible.
What is this typing that you have going on here? Like, generics. I was thinking like generics. Like I think that was introduced in Java 5, right?
Yeah, that came in Java 5.
What are these generics that you have? Oh God. Cool.
But so that's where we're at. So let us know.
Definitely dev channel, Trino Slack. Let us know. Just directly ask us I think people know pretty much where to find us. Ask us on Twitter, ask us on LinkedIn. Doesn't matter where, but just let us know. I'm kind of curious to see what the community is thinking about this. I think there was 8 was pretty well established by the time we were getting around to 11. And I feel like, that was a hard jump, because like once you've rooted a lot of stuff in a certain version of the JVM, then it's like you're kind of feeling like there's no way I'm moving off this, but because there's just so much to consider. But then like with this one, I think when we reminded people like, hey, Trino should be running on its own server anyways, and like just if you need to, just let it run on its own little like node island. That's the only thing in your org that has Java 17 on it. I think people were a little more like, oh, okay, cool. That's as long as that's the case, and I can still have my clients, running in an older version of Java and that kind of thing. Like you can run your JDBC stuff all on Java 8 or Java 11, whatever your total company does. You just need to run the Java servers on the latest Java. That's really the only thing. So
yeah, that's a good point.
Let us know about that, and what your thoughts are. And otherwise, should we move on to the pull request of the episode?
Let's do it.
All right, pull request of the episode. All right, so what pencil is that? Is that how I would say this guy's name? What pencil?
I'm guessing. I don't know. I tried to contact him or her, and I only just sort of heard back. So if you're out there, please comment. If you're listening live, we love we love the contribution. It's really awesome. And there's screenshots in here, as you can see. Basically, the web UI, as you can see here, the counter for the different connected workers now becomes a link, and then it shows basically the information that's already available. So system.runtime.node, like the system catalog / the system information in Trino, basically has all that information available. So what the contributor needed to do is basically just expose that on an endpoint, and then like write the UI for it. So it's very much a UI kind of like PR. That's also why David looked into it and helped with the review.
Nice.
Which is one of those great examples, right? Like Piotr Findeisen was like, I'm not a UI guy, and like Piotr is amazing. Like when the stuff he is writing on the core engine is amazing, but he also knows his limitations, right? Like, and he's not a UI guy. It's just a totally different skill set, right?
Yeah.
And luckily, we have a lot of different people in the community and at Starburst that can help. And David is a wizard on the UI kind of stuff, and so he helped with the review, and that's really great to have this kind of like collaboration and helping others. And I think Wood Pencil also commented towards the end that he really enjoyed the experience and learned a lot, right? So that's one of those things, right? Like when you send a pull request, it's not only that you helping that project contribute and improving it, you're also learning as part of the process, learning best practices, learning maybe new things on how things are working, what best to do. So we got that in, and I can show it to you later on. It's a really nice feature. So thanks again for contributing that.
Cool. Yeah, thank you so much, Wood Pencil. That's awesome. I'm excited to see what this looks like in the demo. So I guess without further ado, should we demo this? Let's go for it.
Yeah. I'm gonna let you show my screen.
I already did it. I did that sneakery while I had the.
All right.
That's what the transition's for.
Yeah. Let's see where I am. So I find my way. So
Could you make the code a little bigger? Just a little bit.
Even bigger. Okay, I can try to make it even bigger. All right. So, and for some reason this is going very slow here. All right, so here we are. So here I have a Trino server targz, and I have a directory. So if I want to show, I don't know what's going on. My keyboard is kind of behaving weirdly. So this is the tarball. I want to extract this. So I go tar xfvz, for example, and then the Trino server. Wow, what is going on? So I just extract this targz file, and you see it just runs through extracting all the files.
All the things.
All the things. And you can see here, there's the lib. So if I go now ls. Oh, sorry, Trino. Hang on. I don't know what's going on with my.
It's the extra challenge that we've added to your demo.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, it's really weird. Let me just close some of these things here. Okay, let's go back here. All right, so you see I can go into this directory. So if I do an ls now, this is what's there, right? So
yeah, bin libin plugin.
Yeah, so if I go ls bin, you see there's the launcher file. I don't know what's happening here. My mouse pad is, or something is happening. Let me close this. I'm gonna.
Here, I'll take you off. Why don't you get a quick second, and then we'll restart the demo here in a second. Let me know when you're ready.
Yeah, I'm gonna.
Always fun when you get these live demos, and all of a sudden, like I think literally at the last, I think it was the Amundsen episode. I was trying out a different web browser, and all of a sudden StreamYard, the thing that we stream this show with, was really acting clunky when like I would on my local side, I was seeing all the code, and then like I just realized that StreamYard was just like showing the changes to that screen super slow. And so this wasn't even like a code issue per se. It was more like my web browser issue. So anyways, it seems like StreamYard specifically only works on Chromium-based browsers, and otherwise has like this really slow latency going on. So anyways, how's it looking, Manfred? Let's see. I've lost him. Well, while Manfred is figuring that out, why don't I just move on? We'll hop back to the demo here in a second and remove him out of there. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the question of the week. All right. So hopefully we can get that demo coming back to you, and we'll retry it. That's the wonderful thing about live shows. So question of the week. I saw this wonderful question that was asked that I'll summarize the version of it, but it's basically asked on Slack a while back. And so somebody was playing around with the Delta Lake connector that we learned about in the previous episode. And they were asking, okay, is Delta Lake actually supporting HDFS? And so the down and dirty, basic, super quick answer is yes, HDFS is supported. They were kind of bringing up like, why is this not in the documentation? Because we see, Assure ADLS, Gen 2, S3, and S3 compatible storage, but nothing's ever mentioned about HDFS. And so it's just kind of interesting because, historically we've always supported HDFS. So, in our minds, it's like a very clear cut, like, yeah, of course we support HDFS. But anybody who may be new to the project may still not be 100% sure like where we do and don't support HDFS. So anytime that we kind of have any of these like data lake and data warehouse type connectors, these will support HDFS at a baseline, because that's essentially a lot of the code that was written, the kind of core use case around Trino. So that is done, and in fact, maybe it makes sense that we should probably at least add that into the documentation. So that hadn't been called out, but that is the case now. When we dug into a little bit more, it kind of made a little more sense why this individual was asking this question, was because they were running a lot of these commands from a particular client inside of IntelliJ, and so they got this unsupported target SQL type, and so -155 maps internally in Trino to some Trino type, but then when we looked at the actual thing that they ran, this was the command that they ran, and then they got the error message, cannot write to table HDFS master presto, and then it says HDFS is not supported. So clearly, yeah, it makes it seem like, yeah, HDFS is not supported based on that error message, and you don't have anything about HDFS in the documentation. So turned out, and I didn't have too much context into this that I was able to dig up, but I tried to reproduce it on my IntelliJ and I was not able to. But essentially, this comes down to an issue on the IntelliJ client using the JDBC. It was kind of a mishandling somewhere, and so this was kind of reported. And has been seen a couple times. So if you ever kind of have an issue with one of the various clients, I'd say the most common one that people in the community are using is dbeaver, and that's the one we see the kind of least issues with. But if you ever have an issue like this, the same way that like if you're on a web browser and you have an issue with like a particular script running on some website or something, just try a different browser, right? So the same thing is what I would recommend when you're playing around with clients. Just try changing to a different client and seeing if you get the same issue outside of the CLI, and then that should generally resolve the issue. So I just ran through the question of the week, Manfred. How are you feeling about the demo? Do we need to do this offline afterwards?
No, I can't do it. This is crazy. Like I've never experienced a crash like that on my Mac before. Like literally, like the Windows started flickering and everything. And I heard you talk, and then I just had to pull the power plug, like basically full on shutdown. But I'm back in business, I think. So let's do it.
All right. Well, we did the question of the week, so let's hop back to the demo of the week. All right.
So we're back in business here. I am on my extracted folder, so CD Trino server, right? Like that's what it creates by default, right? So I have the bin directory, ls bin, launcher properties, launcher file. I have the lib directory, lib. And that's all these files. You see, there's a lot of libraries. And you see here, for example, there's the Jetty binaries for the Jetty application server and all sorts of other dependencies, right? So this is basically what makes Trino work, including the Trino code itself here, like all the Trino something, right? So that's what constitutes Trino and all the third-party dependencies. Now, if I go ls plugin, you see there's all the plugins, and you see there's all the connectors, but also things like password authenticator, resource group managers, property managers, and stuff like that. And then if I go LSA plugins iceberg, you see there's again a whole bunch of Java files that constitute the iceberg connectors.
And one thing I want to say, in case we're going to index directly to this point. So the first thing that you did before you did all this, you ran a tar command, or specifically an untar command, but like basically the tar command to decompress all of this.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just our xf reset Trino server .target set like that, and that creates that directory, right?
Yeah, all these.
But again, if you look at that directory, cd Trino server, it's not suitable, right? Like if I go /bin, like I go and try to run this /bin launcher run, it's not going to work because config file missing, right? Like, and it already tells me etc config.properties, right? So that's missing. So I prepared one before where I did that. So if I go over and I called it coordinator, looks familiar, right? Same stuff. The only thing that's different is I copied in this etc file, the directory. And then when I ran it, it started to create this var directory. So that's where the temporary storage logs and stuff like that go.
Pid file,
yeah. Like so, let's look at the etc directory, for example. So if I go and look at the config properties file, that's the one that says all it says here is yes, this needs to be the coordinator. And then this runs on port 8080. It gets 5 gig of max memory. And the discovery server URI, which is the URI or URL where all the different workers and coordinator work together and understand each other, is localhost 8080. So basically, this is just localhost 8080 because, well, I'm running on localhost, right? Typically, that would be the coordinator's URL.
One quick thing to point out about this too, when we were talking about packaging, a lot of other systems sometimes have like separate packages or separate binaries that they have for like a coordinator and like a worker type node. In Trino's case, it's all in the same thing. And that one line there, that coordinator equals true, is the thing that changes a whole node from acting as a coordinator versus acting as a worker.
Exactly. And I'm going to show you that in a sec, actually. So The other one I wanted to show you is cat JVM config. you see this is just the default, and it's just that these are basically the startup parameters for the Java virtual machine that's going to run it, right? And you see here specifically you have to set the memory here with MX, in this case 4 gig. I mean, this is just my local laptop, so this is just going to grind a bit, but it's going to work, right? So typically you have a much bigger server, you set that to like 80-ish% of your server so that it uses the max memory that server can give the runtime, right? So that's another configuration that you need to do. And then if you go and look at our catalogs directory, you see there's the different catalogs. In this case, I only have a couple of useless ones, basically, or it's like testing ones. So I have memory for brain, black hole connector for def null, JMX connector to look at stats, and then TPCH and TPCDH for some sample data, right? So similar. Importantly, all this configuration is the same in the worker. So I've made another directory that's called worker, and there's a worker in here, and that has the same. So if I go ls etc catalog, it has the same stuff in here, right? So the same catalogs. Like this is important because when a query runs on a cluster, the coordinator will talk to the underlying data source and say, hey, which tables exist? And like, does that column exist? So is that query even valid and that kind of stuff? But then when it comes to running the query, it's going to be distributed across the cluster, right? So everyone has to be in the same picture. You can't have a coordinator that has a catalog file and then the worker doesn't. Well, then what's the worker going to do, right? Like it's not going to know. So they have to be the same. But what has to be different is the config file. So if I go cat etc config.properties, this is different, right? So here it's coordinator false. And then in my case, I'm running it on the same server on localhost. So I have to get a different HTTP port to run it on. And then this is basically the discover URI that points to the coordinator, which runs on 8080, right? So if I do this now, I can go and go to the coordinator and go /bin launcher run, and we'll do it with run so we can see the console. And now you see it's starting up, and you also see all the parameters and configuration properties, and then it runs the server. You see the plugin manager registers all the plugins, and then it's up, right? So this is already it. So Trino is running. So I can go localhost, and now this is the 8080. And there's my web UI, no security, no nothing, right? This is just a local hackery. So, and you see there's one worker because the coordinator acts as the worker, right? Mm-hmm. So this is it. But, and now here's the cool new feature. If I go cd /worker, now I can start that one as well, /bin launcher run. That will register with the coordinator. And I have a cluster of 2 running, right? Like in my case, this is just for demo purposes. Typically, this would be on a separate server, right? Mm-hmm. But now 2 of them are running. They talk to each other. And if I go back here, it should register the worker, but maybe it doesn't.
I think it should auto update once I think you not having to refresh it should auto update.
Yeah. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Like ultimately, the new feature so this is the configuration you need to do, right? So again, you have to have the etc folder. So if I go ls, actually I can go tree etc. You see, there's the catalogs and there's those config properties. And the new feature that we get from Woodpencil is that now I can click here on active workers and I see the list of the workers. Oh, and the problem is probably my node ID. I didn't change the node ID. So the node ID that's in node.properties, I have only one node ID. I would have to change that. That's the problem. Anyway, doesn't matter. But like ultimately you get the same thing. You get all the workers available in the list here as active workers. Mm-hmm. you get the list of, I don't know, like hopefully you have more than one, right? Like you might have 5 or 10 or maybe 100, right? Like a large Trino clusters often have like 100, 200 workers, right? So you get the list, and then you can check with each one of them what's going on, and you get sort of resource utilization, heap and stuff like that. All you can even create a thread snapshot for troubleshooting purposes. You get the IP address and all that kind of stuff. So
super cool.
It's really nice as a new feature, right? Like this is a new contributor that just like, looked into this a bit and hacked around and got some help from David and got this all working. So I think that's an amazing feat. And you see with the system runtime info, you get all this useful information.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool, I thought.
I love it. Yeah. No, I mean, anytime there's like extra UI features, now it can sometimes maybe feel like, oh my, there's so much stuff to learn about in the UI, but it's really like, once you kind of get your footing in there with the UI and you get to understand what each kind of page is kind of helping you out with, it's incredible how useful that is. And a lot of it's funny how people starting out don't even know about the UIs at the very beginning. And so I kind of like, have you like, they're like, I don't know where to find this log. And I'm like, have you gone to the UI? And they're like, what UI?
Yeah. It's totally useful. Also, like you can also hook up the JMX connector to then look at all the JMX properties. You can hook up the system, like the system data is already available. So you can query all the system data there. Like if you don't find something in the UI, you can even dive deeper. So lots of stuff is available. So it's really useful. Now, one last demo I'm going to throw in for free today. Is if I go and show you this Docker run Trino, this is how you run Docker container for Trino. Docker run, right? Like this, and this is interesting.
Can you make it a little bit bigger, Manfred?
Oh yeah, sorry.
I know I've waited this whole time to tell you that, but just to see this particular one, I don't know why I couldn't see it as well.
So if I go, I have a little script, so I don't have to type the whole thing. But basically, Docker run -p. So the internal port 8080 from the container gets published out to the external port 8080, so I can see it locally. And then I'm running in Trino 377. When I run the script, you can see that this is basically doing the same thing that I did with the Tarball, but it already is pre-configured. So it starts everything up. And if you want to peek around on how the container is running, you can cheat and get into the container. So you can go Docker PS, and you see here is my Trino server. So I can go Docker exec -it. So run a command in the Docker container so-and-so. And the command we're going to run as an interactive terminal is bin sh. So now I'm in the Docker container. And I can see, for example, ls etc Trino. There's my pre-built configuration files that came already pre-built in the container image, right? So I can also see Trino catalog, for example. And you see that out of the box, the Docker container comes with these connectors already configured. Right, so that's the difference, right? Like, and also I can go Java minus version. Oh, it's actually minus version, I think. So you see, this is Java 11.14 OpenJDK. So Java is there, Python is there, everything is in the container already, including some default config files. And then, as you pointed out, your example project repository or getting started has a lot more of those where you then add custom configuration and all that kind of stuff. So just showing the difference, right? The Tarball has nothing, the container has everything, the RPM is kind of in between, right? So
very cool. Very, very cool. Well, thanks for that's a pretty awesome demo. I'm actually like, it's really cool to kind of take a moment to actually like step back and look at all this stuff. It's like I last looked a lot of this stuff back when I was first starting out on Trino at my previous company. And it was like, we had to do such a deep dive because we were looking through all the different packaging implementations, seeing which one was going to work best for our ops team. This is not something that the developers, or maybe if you're like a data engineer persona type, like, that's not what you're going to be working on day to day. But like that first, up and coming, like coordinating
How
with
do
the
you
ops
provision?
and security team, and how do you provision all this stuff and figuring out it becomes very critical and very important in terms of how do you get Trino in your org. And so this was even if it comes down to like, how do you just do a proof of concept, making these things super accessible and very straightforward is what we're aiming for. And so if you are struggling with this, there's in terms of getting installations going and things like that, or you're concerned about Java 17, do reach out to us on the Slack channel, and we will we'll be glad to help you through that process and learn. Every single time we help somebody through a process like this, it's learning for us, because we're learning, hey, what are the things that people are facing when they're trying to get these installations in. And it's not always so clear cut to say, oh well, this is the only thing we offer. No, we want to kind of evolve, and we're bringing on Kubernetes charts, because now Kubernetes is becoming a much more common pattern. So making a Helm chart for that and making these types of default values, that's yet another way that we're kind of like hoping to kind of keep up to speed with a lot of these like kind of cloud deployments. Real quick, I wanted to say hi, Vera. Thanks for the warm welcome back, and thanks for joining the show today. Hopefully, this is probably a lot of review for some of you Trino vets, but I definitely know it's maybe specifically this will get everyone's gears turning when it comes to like the customization part of it. How do I make my own custom thing version of Trino so that I'm making the most optimal deployment for my own organization and things like that.
Yeah, it's also interesting. Like, I think it's really cool how you were mentioning that like this is something that you have to worry about in the beginning a lot. It doesn't go away, and the thing is, it is so different for each organization what their standards are, what operating system they require, what security things in the cloud, what provisioning system. So there's all this flexibility, and in the Trino ecosystem, we're also lucky enough to have commercial offerings like Starburst Enterprise, where Starburst can help you along, Starburst Galaxy, where, well, you don't have to worry about it. It's
Any
just
of this.
all in the SaaS, right? Like, it just works, and you can start writing your queries, right? Like, I had a Trino meetup yesterday with Michael Cecino from Visible Systems, and they have a whole application that wraps around Galaxy and treats Galaxy like as a processing engine under the hood, so to speak. I mean, it's visible, but not that visible.
Yeah.
The main concept is their application, right? So it allows you to do all these different things, and Trino is just amazing in that aspect. So it's really cool.
Totally. One last little call out before we head off. So, we mentioned in the beginning, I'd like to mention it one more time in the end, Cinco de Trino, we're having it on May 5th, which is on Cinco de Mayo. And so do sign up for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're basically going to be, kind of getting together. I think the central theme for this one was, kind of around seeing Trino as a little bit of like a data lake engine. Sometimes, people think about Trino as just a federated query engine. And so we're trying to kind of bring up Trino in the different contexts that it's used, so to give people different ideas. And so we do have a lot of people using, say Iceberg and things like that. But when you think of the data lake, it also includes a lot of these extra tools like thinking data quality checks and using DBT, actually running, kind of more batch oriented ELT processes. And with Project Tardigrade, being able to kind of bring Trino in the forefront of like a batch query engine that has the guardrails of query failure recovery. It kind of makes it a lot more usable in these contexts. So you'll hear from a lot of people about thinking about Trino now, or at least rethinking about Trino in the context of how do you use it as like the sole query engine of your data lake. And so we'll hear from people from a lot of the formats that we, is hotly debated of which one should I use. We're going to have actually all three of the very popular table formats, Iceberg, Delta Lake, and Hootie. All the companies kind of behind those three are going to be coming and kind of talking about their products, what they have going on in their open source communities. And so that's going to be really exciting to hear, get some insight on. And then we're, just talking about, again, all those tools around data lake. So it's going to be fun. Just go to starburst.io /info /Cinco-Day Trino. And that's going to be also linked here in the show notes if you want to just go straight to that link, sign up for that, and then check it out. So really exciting stuff. Manfred, before we hop off, do you have anything else you wanna add?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, like it's kind of funny how like with all the Lakehouse stuff with Iceberg and others, it's kind of coming full circle, right? Because Trino started to improve upon like the object storage systems all around Hive and Hadoop.
Yeah.
And then it spread out to support all sorts of things in federated query. And now it's kind of going back to like the V2 versions of like, Hadoop and Hive essentially is what like massively improved versions of that is basically what the Iceberg and other table formats kind of are.
Yeah.
And it's kind of going back to, of course, we're going to support those very well as well. And it's really great to see what that unlocks. It's cool.
Totally. Yeah. It is really funny. It's like we've been like nothing has changed yet. Everything has changed. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're really excited to hear about all these talks and innovations, things coming around Trino. And of course, I think that guy might be making a little bit of an attendance or show up at the very beginning. So look forward to that. And until next month, we'll see you then.
Awesome. Bye.
Take care.
Music for the show is from the Mega Man 6 gameplay album by Krzysztof Sławikowski. Don't forget to give us a star on the Trino repository at github.com/TrinoDB/Trino. And for more information on future shows and to find show notes, check out trino.io/broadcast.